Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where we discuss leading political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. It has proven to be a very busy week, a lot to cover. Let's jump in. And first up, a new investigation by state-run Xinhua's Tan, essentially a senior state media official, published yesterday, has uncovered a troubling development in China's local government financing landscape. A landscape that was already deeply troubled. Struggling local government financing vehicles are increasingly offloading their massive debt risks onto ordinary citizens. Through, quote, directed financing, end quote, private placement products once marketed only to institutions, these quasi-government entities are now luring retail investors with annualized returns above 8%, aggressive sales pitches, and the reassuring implication of official endorsement. Behind the shine, however, lies a financing model that experts warn is, quote, drinking poison to quench thirst. End quote. As regulatory scrutiny tightens and traditional borrowing channels shrink, local government financing vehicles, especially those with weak balance sheets, which at this point is most of them, have begun selling high-yield products across provincial borders, sidestepping local regulatory safeguards. Small, lightly regulated middlemen bypass major banks to target retail investors directly, promising short-term payouts that bear little resemblance to the slow-burn returns of infrastructure projects. It's worth taking a step back here, because this is a massive red flag for China's financial system. These debt-ridden local government financing vehicles are basically selling junk debt to regular people, implying that it's government-backed even though it is not. Dozens of agreements reviewed by Tan show yields consistently above 8%. Promotional materials even offer tiered subscription packages ranging from 100,000 RMB to 2 million RMB, with annualized returns hitting 9.6% for 12-month products and rising to 11.7% for larger, longer-term commitments. For cautious savers squeezed by a sluggish property market that has wiped out a lot of household wealth and falling bank deposit rates, which result in savings making almost no returns, such, quote, safe-seeming high yields, end quote, paired with a state-owned logo, were irresistible. The fact that a leading state-run outlet is publishing this expose shows just how shocking and concerning this is to officials in Beijing. Until 2024, repayments generally arrived on schedule, but this year, surprise, surprise, some products slipped into overdue interest payments, triggering anxiety among thousands of investors. Many admitted to ignoring risk disclosures because they believed local government financing vehicles, being government-affiliated, could not fail. This assumption is dangerous. The piece explains that local government financing vehicle funds are typically used for long-cycle, low-yield public infrastructure projects. Offering double-digit short-term returns defies product-level cash flow logic and violates basic principles of market discipline. To create the illusion of safety, some issuers even relied on mutual guarantees among state-owned entities, a circular structure that masks rather than mitigates underlying risk. It goes without saying that this is a huge systemic risk in the making. Experts interviewed by the outlet emphasize that what appears to be diversification is, in fact, simply risk transfer, from indebted local platforms to financially unsophisticated households. If allowed to continue, the practice could evolve into a new mutation of implicit debt risk, one borne by the least equipped to absorb losses. Veteran China analyst Bill Bishop, speaking on this news today, was blunt with his observation. Quote, many local governments are desperate for revenue, but allowing some to trick retail investors into investing in some of this debt is a massive regulatory failure. End quote. Local governments may be desperate for revenue, but allowing financially distressed local government financing vehicles to funnel risky debt to retail investors under the guise of government backing is not innovation. It is a profound regulatory failure. When public entities sell high-risk products to citizens seeking safety, the consequences extend far beyond missed interest payments. They erode trust in the very institutions meant to protect the public. Next up, UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer sought to reset Britain's China policy this week with a speech that rejected both the old talk of a golden age and the more recent push toward an economic and diplomatic ice age, positioning his government somewhere in between. Starmer argued for what he called a clear-eyed re-engagement, acknowledging security concerns while insisting that deeper business ties remain in the national interest. The UK Prime Minister plans to make his first official visit to China at the end of January next year. The proposed trip is expected to be contingent, however, on Britain approving Beijing's plan for the new mega embassy in the heart of London. In the background to all this, the UK government and prosecutors have been heavily criticised over the collapse of a China spying case in an official report that describes some of the actions as, quote, shambolic, end quote. That report was published today. Both of these stories we've been following on China Update. But even the Prime Minister's now calibrated tone from this week was not enough for Beijing. In a sharp statement, the Chinese embassy in London said it, quote, firmly opposes, end quote, Starmer's, quote, erroneous remarks, end quote, accusing him of spreading the, quote, so-called China threat, end quote, making, quote, groundless accusations, end quote, and, quote, interfering in China's internal affairs, end quote, on issues including Hong Kong, which we'll come to shortly. Chinese state media echoed the criticism. State-run Global Times, citing Reuters' coverage of the speech, said Starmer was trying to, quote, have it both ways, end quote, warning of Chinese security risks while simultaneously pushing for closer economic relations. One China-based commentator quoted by the nationalist paper argued that this dual approach is unrealistic and ultimately harms Britain's own interests, as it seeks to please domestic hardliners without sacrificing commercial opportunities. Starmer's balancing act arrives at a moment of renewed scrutiny of the UK-China relationship. The release this week of a long-awaited book, All That Glistens, has added fresh fuel to the debate. The book revisits the now discredited idea of a Sino-British golden age, arguing that it masked a deeper pattern of influence operations, elite complacency, and commercial entanglement. The author draws on years of fieldwork in Beijing and extensive open-source research to detail how Chinese state-linked actors targeted UK political and economic institutions, particularly in nuclear energy, property development, and currency markets. The timing is awkward for Starmer, as he seeks a pragmatic middle course. Both Beijing and his domestic critics seem eager to remind him that China policy really allows for easy equilibrium. Now, we have one more development to cover. We move back to Hong Kong, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, it's a huge help as always if you can just hit that like button, and if you want to continue to be on top of analysis like today's, consider subscribing. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description if you'd like to go the extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable as we move into the Christmas season. Thank you so much, everyone, as always, for the incredible ongoing support. And finally for today, the inferno that tore through Wang Fok Court, killing more than 150 people in Hong Kong's worst blaze since the 1940s, should have prompted a moment of collective grief and urgent introspection. Instead, it has become a political minefield, revealing deep structural rot and the authorities' determination to control the public response before it transforms into collective action. We've been following these developments in recent days, and we continue that coverage today. Public anger has been rising as details emerge, suggesting the tragedy was very much preventable. Multiple investigations have exposed a murky, corrupt, plagued building renovation industry riddled with bid rigging, inflated costs, and weak oversight. Former insiders describe the sector as, quote, rotten, end quote, calling Hong Kong a, quote, gold mine, end quote, for predatory syndicates exploiting aging housing estates. Long ignored warnings about manufacturing works, fire hazards, and opaque tendering now lie at the heart of the public fury. Yet the first major disaster under Hong Kong's national security law has triggered something different, a political reflex imported directly from Beijing. Rather than addressing systemic failures, officials turned to the, quote, external hostile forces, end quote, chapter of the crisis management playbook. A spokesperson for Beijing's Office for Safeguarding National Security accused unnamed foreign actors of, quote, stirring up trouble, end quote, and, quote, replicating tactics, end quote, from the 2019 protests. State-aligned media suggested, quote, black-clad rioters, end quote, were attempting to, quote, hijack, end quote, relief efforts. National security officials toured the charred estate while warning the public against, quote, using the disaster to cause chaos. end quote. It was an extraordinary message at a moment of deep mourning. Residents were still searching for missing relatives. Police were still recovering bodies. Volunteers were sorting donated clothes and meals for displaced families. The government's instinct was to criminalize dissent before it appeared. This response fits a well-honed pattern. Since the Tiananmen protests in 1989, public grief, particularly when sparked by a tragedy, has been viewed as inherently political. Disasters solve two problems that typically impede collective action: motivation and coordination. People are already angry, and they already know where to gather. From the 2008 Sichuan earthquake to deadly industrial accidents and COVID-era lockdown fires, Beijing's approach has been consistent: seize the narrative, strike early, and suppress organization. Hong Kong's authorities followed that script with precision. A university student distributing flyers calling for an independent inquiry was detained. A press conference planned by lawyers and social workers was abruptly cancelled after police contact. Government figures warned against, quote, politicizing the tragedy, end quote, even as their own rhetoric framed it as a national security threat. Under mounting pressure, Chief Executive John Lee announced an independent committee to investigate the fire, which we covered yesterday, though experts stress that only a full statutory commission of inquiry empowered to compel testimony can restore public trust. Whether the probe will meet that standard remains unclear. What is clear is that Hong Kong society has not lost its civic instincts. Thousands queued for hours to lay flowers at makeshift memorials. Neighbours shared supplies, raised funds, and organised support networks. Experts and journalists document not just the human toll, but the systemic failures behind it. One commentator argued that none of this resembled the conspiracy invoked by officials. It looked instead like a community grieving together, and quietly asserting that accountability still matters. As one activist put it, quote, "This shows Hong Kong people have not been tamed," end quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I hope to see you for another episode, which will either be tomorrow or on Saturday.